Okay. Well, welcome everyone. This is Jennifer Howell at DPSST. It is 1:02, and this is the Criminal Justice Moral Fitness Workgroup on March 20th, 2024. Here at DPSST, and then online we have folks joining us by Teams. We'll do introductions in a moment. First, there's the administrative statement that this is a public meeting subject to the public meeting law. This meeting is live streamed on the DPSST YouTube page and will be recorded in the form of minutes. Discussion of issues will only be conducted by the workgroup members, and please be mindful of comments and side conversations. So just kind of going around the room here, Jennifer Howell, DPSST Legislative Administrative Rules Coordinator.
Kathleen Kalkline, Professional Standards Division Director.
Phyllis Langbacho, Professional Standards Case Coordinator.
Robert Wood, PPC member.
Scotty Downing, PPC member.
Carol Deshawn, Oregon Department of Corrections.
Samantha Cosa, DPSST Executive Assistant.
All right, we have several people joining us online. I think for ease, I'll just call out who I have noted, and then if anybody doesn't get called, please let me know. So I have Greg Armenta, and I have Andy Hyder, I have Lee Eby, Chris Skinner, Mark Daniel, Erica Stolhan, Rhonda Griffin. I have one person who's joining us by phone. I don't know who's joining by phone, but if you can unmute and let us know. And then while we're waiting for the telephone, I also have staff members online, Cindy Park, Jennifer Lavario, and Michelle Morrison, all from DPSST. Is there anyone else who didn't get called out for attendance? I see Ty Hanlon now.
I don't see the phone anymore, so maybe they updated their name.
Okay, or relogged in a different way.
Yeah.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you, everyone. We certainly appreciate you all being here to help us go through these discussions. I'm going to start off with just a quick overview of a little background, because we have some new people who are joining us, and of course there's a lot of time that passes between our meetings and our discussions. So just a brief recap on some discussion to date, and focusing that recap on the discretionary cases. Of course, we have mandatory cases. Those are outlined in statute and rule, and DPSST staff process those administratively because they're mandatory. We're required to take those actions, and we reviewed those in a previous meeting. But we've also been diving into the discretionary cases, which are the cases that are forwarded to the policy committees and the applicant review committee. So I think the cases that you all are used to hearing. And in our last meeting, we talked about the circumstances that prompt DPSST to open a case. And those involve criminal dispositions, separations of employment where there are allegations of misconduct, when a student is dismissed from the academy for misconduct, falsification of documents or forms that are submitted to DPSST. We can also open a case based on the conduct surrounding the arrest or the equivalent citation, my words are failing me. Arrest or citation to appear.
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't always have to have resulted in an actual criminal disposition, whether it be a conviction or some other type of adjudication. And then we also have the catch-all category, which is that receipt of information that would lead an objectively reasonable person to conclude that there is a moral fitness violation. So those are the circumstances in which DPSST can open a case. And when we encounter those circumstances, staff are reviewing all of the records that are available to determine whether there's a potential moral fitness violation. And to do that, we reflect on the definitions that appear in rule for dishonesty, misuse of authority, and misconduct. And that's going to be a lot of our focus today are on the definitions that are being applied to the records, to the information, to the conduct to determine if there's a moral fitness violation. And anytime staff have identified that there's a potential that the conduct meets those definitions, those cases are then prepared and brought forward to the policy committee with the identified information so that the policy committee members can review that conduct and either agree that those moral fitness violations exist or make adjustments to what's been identified as a moral fitness violation, either adding or taking away. And in some cases, there can be a determination by the policy committee that there weren't any moral fitness violations, that it didn't rise to that level. Let's see. I think that's a pretty good basis of the overview. So the first thing on our agenda was the discretionary disqualifiers and processes, the moral fitness definitions. And in our last meeting, we started talking about the definition for dishonesty. And the work group had pretty much affirmed that the current definition of dishonesty is still appropriate, and that DPSST staff should still be bringing forward any findings of dishonesty, and then it would be the committee that would help determine, is it dishonesty that's a moral fitness violation, or is it dishonesty that is a circumstance that's really just an aggravating factor, but not necessarily something that is the moral fitness violation. And then one of the suggestions that came out of that meeting was to potentially look into the addition of language to dishonesty that would capture things such as actions to conceal misconduct. That came forward as something that we could look into as an addition or an expansion of dishonesty. But I wanted to just kind of open it up again for dishonesty and questions and discussion on how we do that. And Kathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think it was mentioned, a couple of the comments that, or clarification that I've had in the 2.5 months that I've been here under dishonesty, and I've seen it go both ways and was looking maybe for this group's thought, and that was really in a criminal interview, and during that time, the officer believes at some point they lied. Oftentimes we see it in DUII, and maybe it's always a standard 2 beers or nothing. And so is that really dishonest at the way we want to look at it versus, as I think Jennifer said, also the consideration of, is that an aggravating factor? But if we broaden it to all, so we don't, because we obviously see some other criminal misconduct. Another example might be they told the officer, no, I wasn't in a house or a place. Later said I lied, I got access this way. And so when we look at dishonesty in a criminal interview, how do we want to look at this, or is that considered that's basically their right under their due process, and therefore we only want to look at dishonesty with as it relates to their job and their job performance. And so I'm interested in hearing maybe some of your guys' opinion when it comes to dishonesty, because I think the last time the group thought, well, if it's anything to do with dishonesty, we want to see it. And so I just want to make sure that if there was some direction on even maybe, does it need to be cited as dishonesty, or some thoughts on adding it as things to consider part of that aggravating, so it's on the lower line.
Is your concern, Kathy, that means a lot more cases would come before us if we have everything that falls under the definition of dishonesty?
No, what I'm more here is dishonesty for that. Everybody lies when everybody says 2 beers. So no, we're not going to find dishonesty. So in other words, are we citing it under dishonesty when it's really something that the committees oftentimes don't see it that way when it comes to, like I said, the majority is going to be under DUII, or if we just said under any criminal contact and the officer believes that they lied to him and they lay it out in the report, do we want to cite as a moral fitness dishonesty and let the committees just vet that information out.
Would it be difficult, though, to put upon the staff's requirements that they look at the discretionary decision, whether it's culpable or capable in a DUI situation? Or would you rather have something black and white that comes before the committees, then the committee can say, okay, there's mitigating circumstances because they were still drunk when they made that statement?
Yeah, I think we're applying, somewhat of a common sense and trying not to get into the black and white. So if in the work group thought, let us apply some of that to say, we'll add it in or it's in the report, but when we actually present and say, when we're presenting, we say, we find that there is a moral fitness violation, and then we present it. And when all there is in dishonesty is, they lied to the officer, said they had 2 beers, but they blew a .10, we know that can't be right. Is that really what the intent of that dishonesty was? Or again, go to the misconduct, you were charged criminally, you expose risk and harm to people out on the street, and then one of the factors down below may be,
Right.
we either call it out or don't, it's in the case packet. So that's the ones that I see a little bit more frequently, and I'm not sure that was the intent all along. And Jennifer and Melissa, if you have anything further to clarify, feel free to jump in at that point.
John Frost?
As a committee member, I think personally, I kind of think that in like a DUI case, we would see that as a mitigating circumstance, like, or an aggravating, I only had 2 beers. I don't think it was the dishonesty aspect of it. I don't really see, like in a DUI case, to me, the dishonesty is more along the lines of some of the other things that I've seen where they lie about what they've been doing, like some of these other, where they harass staff or they've done some other things and they're in an administrative investigation situation. To me, that's where dishonesty is a bigger factor rather than on the side of the street in the middle of a DUI stop. Because even I know everybody's like, yeah, 2 beers or 2 shots or whatever. And so to me, that's not a big thing. To me, it's more along the lines of like staff on staff situations, or where they're being dishonest because they know they're going to be in trouble and they're trying to backtrack a little bit. You know what I'm trying to say? To me, and I think that's something the committee needs to look at, like when it comes to them. I mean, so as a DUI thing, I don't see it as a big, because we kind of all know that's what people always say. I get that's kind of what I'm trying to get out. It's like stuck in my head.
No, I appreciate that. Jennifer?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that, can you prove intent in that situation? That's one thought. And the other is, BPSST could put something of that nature in other relevant circumstances, and the committee can then determine whether they want it to be a moral fitness violation or not. So even if we don't determine it is, the committee still can, and vice versa.
And I wasn't here last time for this discussion, but so we've also had situations where someone lies to a supervisor and then they correct it like pretty soon after. And we've had cases like that at our department where I was going to do that or I did it, and then they immediately go or soon after go, hey, when I said that I don't know why I said that, shouldn't have said that, not sure. But they lied, and even though they made, basically self-correcting behavior to try to fix it, it still didn't work out well for them. So, and that's where I kind of look at that same thing, everyone lies, but you say something and then you say, I shouldn't have said that, that's not the truth. And so is there wiggle room there when you're reviewing these cases, or would that go to the committee, something like that? Would that just be a dishonesty?
So you want the discretion at the agency. So if they look at the determination, was it excited utterance and right after they corrected versus they lied, at some point they corrected it. And so if the agency took action, separated the person, that's when we're going to see it. And so then in that case, in their employment, we're going to present that to the committee for you guys to determine, one, are you going to take action, and if so, how much, and then right after, it might be when you guys determine, is this a forever, or is it a 3-year, or no action, but found to do that. In the criminal, and I think I'm hearing most of you say, and like I said, we've just been a little inconsistent on when we presented DUIs with that dishonesty, and so I think I'm hearing in that interpretation, it can be put down, but we're not going to cite it for when they're in a criminal investigation. We won't cite dishonesty if I'm hearing everybody right, and just add if we point it out, because again, these are usually individuals who are in our profession, and so they're in circumstances where they're now being contacted by law enforcement and or arrested, and so we'll often get their statements, and in it they may have lied multiple times, and the officer can prove that. So then when it comes here, is there a moral fitness thing to consider during those criminal ones? And just wanting to make sure I hear from all of you on your thoughts on that.
Of course, Kathy, you also have the circumstance, heaven forbid, that a police officer or anybody who we're looking at gets charged with GFI, giving false information, and is convicted of giving false information under that particular set of criminal statutes, and that really should be reviewed and presented.
Right.
On the other side, the DUI, I get that, but if you're purposefully you're in contact with an enforcement officer out there and you give false information. And you get charged with GFI and you get convicted of GFI. Definitely, I think that needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Any other folks online have any other thoughts? And again, another way I've seen it play out is criminal charge, but definitely there was a discussion because they felt like it was an investigation over a period of time, and they felt that the public safety person was less than cooperative and kind of circumventing, and so it kind of aggravated the situation. In that case, when the committee reviewed it, that was clearly an aggravating circumstance that was brought up. So I think I'm hearing what you guys are saying, so I do appreciate that.
All right, Chief Skinner.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to participate. I think one of the challenges we have is when we think about dishonesty, or in our organization, we just label it as truthfulness. Is it shows up in a bunch of different ways in our profession, and there's some that are just no-brainers, and those are the easy ones. The ones that we get stuck on, it feels like, are the ones that are kind of the ones surrounding the untruthfulness or dishonestly by omission, the ones that maybe have some other collateral facts around it to suggest maybe it wasn't as intentional as some others might be. And I know for us in our organization, that truthfulness thing is kind of the kiss of death. And we really are very intentional around trying to articulate that there was a willfulness to be dishonest before we go completely down that path. We've kind of taken a gray area and gone down some paths of questioning somebody's integrity around decision making, but not necessarily gone to the extent that we've called them untruthful because of what that triggers, making sure that we have some level of willfulness around that. And I think one of the challenges are, as DPSST staff gets all of these investigations from all over the state, every organization looks at it very differently. There's some level of subjectivity that you guys are trying to evaluate. And in many cases, and I'm sensitive to this, your bar is probably a bit low to make sure you don't miss something. And so that everything comes to the PCC, and then we sit in the PCC, and every once in a while, I know I am in my inner voice is just like, why are we talking about this? This doesn't feel like it rises to that level. So I'm not sure you're going to be able to thread that needle completely. And so be patient as we continue to still struggle with why we hear certain cases. But I think that recognition of knowing that we're not going to get this perfect, as we evaluate this, there's nuances to these investigations. And I don't know who all's doing the evaluation at DPSST, but Kathy, having you there gives a really unique chief's perspective on some of these things, and you maybe be a little bit of a tiebreaker on should we not take it to PSCC because of your tremendous experience both in Washington State here and at home in Oregon. But I do think there's that dialogue I was listening to around intent or the actual language and some of the I think it's either OAR or ORS is the willfulness of the statement or the action that would lend itself to being untruthful or dishonest is really what I'm more focused on.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I appreciate that, and I think both Jennifer and Melissa can attest to looking at every single case and having robust discussions on both sides, right? And that does go on. And it does help me when I'm you guys are to control this work group, but I feel it's important that at least I bring to you examples or suggestions where we might need a little guidance, because what I found is being on the other side and being on this work group, if you just leave it open-ended, it doesn't really get to where we need to really think about, was that the intent, or can we phrase something a little bit different? So under the dishonesty, another trend that we've seen is the Brady, where they've been put on a Brady list, but there's been no other investigation other than simply being put on the Brady list. Or maybe records aren't available. And so I think we've seen a little bit of an uptick on that as well. So again, trying to, if we have the information, we'll bring it to the committees for review. But when everything is sealed and we feel like we don't have, the facts are only partial, which has been in some cases, then we're administratively closing. But again, any thoughts under this dishonesty on the Brady that you guys want to talk about or vet out a little bit before we move on?
Well, I think you have to be careful with Brady because just all 36 counties in the state will have a different due process or zero due process. And I think for the committee or even for y'all to consider, oh, the person's on Brady, they're untruthful. If you're able to dig deeper and find out, you may come to a completely different decision. So I would look at Brady very carefully. It wouldn't carry a ton of weight unless it's a pretty obvious, because there's just not a due process. It's the discretion is solely with each district attorney, essentially.
And that's kind of what our litmus test. Chief Skinner.
Yeah, Scotty just basically stole my thunder, because that whole Brady conversation, in my experience, has been so discretionary and subjective based on the district attorney's interpretation. And I know down here in Lane County, we've got like different levels of Brady. I've got a Brady yellow and a Brady red, and the yellow is you can still testify. We just are not that worried about it, but we're going to disclose. And the red is never be in my courtroom again. And I'm I don't think we're going to get all the DAs together to have the same, standard of how we evaluate these. And so that's another one of those ones that feels really squishy. If that's by virtue of them making some kind of an opinion that's going to trigger something for us, I'm just a little bit leery of that.
And that's kind of what we've been looking at is what other supporting information do you have? And then if we feel like we have it, we're definitely going to bring it forward for discussion and review. But if we have no other facts or circumstances, it's been my direction to administratively close that. So, but again, I've got all of you here at once, and any things to consider, I appreciate any input. Okay, I think we've covered dishonesty.
So on page 2 of that memo, at the top, we have the definition for misuse of authority. Misuse of authority is intentional conduct that includes the use or attempted use of one's position or authority as a public safety professional to obtain a benefit, avoid a detriment, or harm another. So we just want to take a moment to review that definition and how it's been applied, how it comes forward as cases, what its intent is. Find out if the work group has any recommended changes or wants to seek clarification. So of note, misuse of authority is infrequently used and has been recognized as a high bar, but important to retain as a moral fitness violation category. That came from past work group feedback in the past iterations from 2019 and before. And historically, this category was intended for use when a public safety professional engages in intentional conduct that provides an outcome that they can only achieve by leveraging their public safety position. And we would ask you to reaffirm or modify that application of the rule. I also have one additional staff note, and that is the definition says using position or authority to obtain a benefit. And that has been called into question in one of our contested case processes, what was intended by benefit, the use of obtaining a benefit, as opposed to our discharge for cause definition, which says, which uses the term personal gain. So just kind of throwing all of that out there and now opening up for discussion and questions and thoughts.
So we have had cases recently where it's been internal, where a person is using their internal position or rank over a new person, or a person who is a probationary employee and it's a much different. So I don't know if there needs to be a little bit of a delineation, because you said it's not used very often. I think maybe out toward the public, but I think internally the PPC has certainly seen cases where someone is using the position or the authority they have within an agency to get a benefit or a gain, and it's cost the probationary employee and themselves their careers, and so I don't know if that should be delineated out. I think the police policy committee has been very clear and direct on those cases. So, am I making sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. I don't know if it exactly fits in that category, but it certainly is what's happening as a practical matter. Someone is misusing their position of authority.
And I think that another way that I've seen this, that it challenges us in the profession, because I don't think we look at it this way. And so when we see it presented in a case packet, I think I've just seen the look on some people's face going, huh? When somebody is accused of making a false arrest or contempt of cop or something like that, and we've used it as a benefit, because in the interpretation is a benefit because they could not do this action if it weren't that they were a police officer. So that's a different way of thinking it, where maybe I might think of it as, well, you harmed somebody because you unlawfully detained him, maybe even caused him to go to jail if it got that far. And so, again, it's been presented both ways, and happy to hear anybody else's thought on that. Benefit has also been used in the LEDs, which I think is pretty intuitive to all of us. So if you're accessing your databases, you use it for your personal gain. That's been thought of and used as a benefit, and it also could have harmed somebody, but we've seen it in that regards. And I think that's a little more straightforward, but benefit when it comes to maybe making an unlawful arrest, when people think, what did they get from it? Did they really benefit? Because I think some of the argument back is, I didn't get a monetary benefit, I didn't get anything out of it. And so again, are you looking at it, could we look at it as, if it weren't for your authority, so you gained a benefit of whatever, or do we want to just not articulate that way and use it as a harm or detriment to somebody? Chris?
Yeah, I must have got a good night's sleep last night because I've got lots to say. This is another one that, I mean, and this is what makes this work so difficult, is because, again, it's a matter of interpretation statewide, depending on which administrator is kind of looking at this. This particular, and I don't have an answer to this question other than just to say, have a few comments. You know, for me, there's a difference between misuse and abuse of authority. We see that like with sick time use. You can misuse your sick time, or you can abuse your sick time. Those are two completely different things. And we have a tendency to kind of blend the two together when we think about some cases we've seen around people's use of their authority, whether it's misused or abused. You know, the good faith attempt at a really, really bad arrest, you know, you could make an argument that that's not an abuse of your authority, because abuse, I think, is intentional, but it is definitely a misuse of your authority of not knowing that you couldn't have made that arrest. And so I think that's worth trying to delineate between those two. I like the conversation around benefit, kind of who, you know, if benefit is going to be the litmus test by which we determine that there's a misuse or abuse, I mean, who truly benefits. And then we every once in a while have conversations around the table about, you know, especially off-duty conduct and we see that every once in a while, is like, you know, what's that jurisdiction's expectations on whether the person lawfully has the right to intervene based on their public safety officer status? Or is there an expectation that you're going to do that in different jurisdictions? I mean, you know, even here in Eugene, I'm not sure we've really memorialized, okay, if you're off duty, I mean, there's some no-brainer stuff, right? We would expect people to intervene on, but if you're off duty, I mean, making those good decisions about when you insert yourself and when you don't. And then sometimes we see that kind of misuse discussion coming up because of off-duty conduct and whether they should, and whether it's got a tangential connection to personal gain, like, you know, your neighborhood's going to be a whole lot quieter if you just make sure that your neighbor gets arrested. And so now you're going to figure out a way to make sure that happens. So, I mean, that's a lot of words without a lot of substance, and I apologize for that. And it's not bringing a lot of clarity, but I do think this is another tough one. And if we could narrow in on a couple of key criteria by which we view this through, much like the truthfulness thing, I think that'd be helpful.
Jennifer, did you have anything, or you put your hand back down? No, okay.
I mean, I think
I guess just at the administrative level, it's being called into question if, in the case of someone misusing LEDs, that's being called into question. We saw the benefit being they had access to the information and they used it for their own personal gain. We're not sure the administrative judge is going to see it the same way, because the definition of benefit is we don't have one. And so they're going to fall back on that monetary benefit.
Well, I think the key word is intentional. You know, if someone is intentionally, we've had cases where the person ignorantly made an arrest, essentially, that they didn't understand they couldn't do, but they didn't have an intention. They didn't have an intention to say, hey, I'm going to go arrest this person because I can, and misuse my authority. I think that's those are the ones you really have to delineate. We've had them already in the police policy committee where you're like, well, we see why this person did what they did. Maybe they could have handled it differently, but they didn't go out with the intention of saying, I'm going to misuse my authority today. Usually they're put in a situation where it comes up that they're a police officer, or it comes up about their position, and now that becomes part of the narrative that got inserted into the situation they were in, and now you're like, well, they misused their authority, but it was never their intention. There's no evidence that it was ever their intention to do that. So if that makes sense, that I think the intention of it is what really delineates what we should be looking at and what we maybe shouldn't.
I just wanted to second what Jennifer Lavario was saying, that because the definition of benefit and gain aren't necessarily defined specifically, that one interpretation has been that benefit equals a monetary issue, and so just getting that clarified by this work group would be really helpful. Like, it can be things that don't have any monetary value associated with them, like using LEDs to gain information.
So a beneficial outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Greg, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, that's pretty much just what I wanted to say, that maybe there's some way we need to define a definition for gain or benefit to make it more across the board versus an interpretation of what those are. I think that would make things a lot easier if there was an actual definition.
And what would you add as the definition of a benefit?
Yeah, that's something I think we need to come up with, is how you would define gain or benefit, whether it's monetary, whether it's position, whether it's some kind of gift, whatever it is, but need to define across the board what a benefit or a gain is going to be.
Thank you.
So the wording in paragraph 2 implies to me that the word benefit is not mutually exclusive. So it doesn't have to have, in my opinion, it doesn't have to have a benefit to fall under the definition of misuse of authority. It could have avoided detriment.
Correct.
Avoided detriment to the department, or harm another. So a lot of the examples being brought up, I'm just curious that if we're tripping over the word benefit, that's only one element, correct?
Right, and I'm only highlighting the ones where we have come across issues. Some of the things are black and white and this applies. We're just getting into maybe the gray areas, looking to see, sometimes in the committee meetings, you guys aren't necessarily, some ask clarifying questions, but other times, as Chief Skinner said, you just sort of go, why is this that? Why? And then maybe we get busy, we don't ask those clarifying questions later. And so, and then in the case of benefit, like I said, an attorney is hanging their hat on what they think a benefit is and thinking that's their way of getting out of this by saying, well, you mischaracterize it, this really isn't a benefit. And so again, here's a chance to have a robust discussion and see if there's either one, a better way to articulate it, a better way to see, avoid a detriment and harm. So the benefit, where detriment or harm is more of a negative to either the other subject, most likely not to the person in authority, but a benefit, again, how we look at it is, I definitely would not advocate for monetary only because of the LEDs. We know the stalking stuff. So if I'm running LEDs because I want to get a date with somebody and now I'm going and contacting them, so that's a benefit to them that they wouldn't otherwise have, but it's not necessarily monetary. So if we decide we want to do benefit or beneficial, those are things that I'd love to hear from you guys. And I know you guys have been waiting. Go ahead.
So, to me, because I'm in corrections and we don't deal with the public a lot, to me, more along the lines of position or authority is like the sergeants, lieutenants, captains, the command staff that put junior staff in positions or make requests of them that are inappropriate, and they start using that position or their authority to, like my institution right at the moment has a huge thing going on about sexual harassment. And to me, that's what that is that a lieutenant or a captain is misusing their authority to get a benefit out of a junior staff member. And I know with police, there's a whole different kind of situation, because in dealing with the public every day, you can misuse your authority in some way. But to me, it's more along the lines of internal with staff rather than it is with the general public. Because for the most part, I know I don't deal with leads every day. I haven't seen a leads computer in years. So, and I know that's still a high bar to make, even within internal investigations. So.
Thank you. And again, with all the other disciplines, I might go down a rabbit hole because I'm most familiar with police. So thank you. Please speak up. How you would interpret this in other settings is extremely important, because it's tended to be broad and applicable to all disciplines. We have, go ahead. No, I know that, but the one
Greg, did you have a follow-up comment, or is there?
Sorry, I just forgot to unclick.
Okay, Chief Skinner.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'd say about benefit, and I think probably this is why the monetary piece of this keeps coming up, is it's probably the most objective evaluation of the term benefit we can come up with, because it's universally held that if you increase the monetary value as a result of your action, that is some benefit. I think the place that we have a tendency to go as a committee or as a staff is we start applying our own paradigm around a benefit in certain situations where the benefit lies in the eyes of the beholder. And so oftentimes it's tough to be in the mind of the individual's actions as to whether or not they even perceived it as a benefit or not. Trust me, there are many things that on the outside looking in, you would think are a benefit to being the police chief in the city of Eugene, and it's just absolutely not the case. So I use that as a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way to just say, I'm not sure how we navigate that concept of the subjectivity of benefit outside the monetary piece, the subjectivity of benefit, without having an investigation that, basically calls out from the individual that they did it on purpose because they knew they were going to get something for it, and they viewed that as a benefit.
Almost like Bacho for the record. I think the idea that would come up in my head would to just say something along the lines of, for the purpose of the rule, benefit can include both monetary and non-monetary gain, or whatever the verbiage, so that we're not identifying specifically what the issues are getting into the weeds.
Right.
Yeah, my only I totally agree with that. My only concern is that then what we do is we have third-party people assigning a value to a non-monetary benefit on behalf of somebody else. And let's just be honest, sometimes we have investigations in front of us that are not as complete as maybe they could be, that answers that question. And so I think we just have to be careful about how some of our own biases show up in how we do this, absent really good information in the investigative document.
Erica?
I was just going to add, kind of along the same lines as what everybody else has said so far, but leaving it a little softer or more broad, only because depending on what it is and why it's coming forward, there is subjectiveness to that, but I'm trying to think of exactly how to word it. But, like in a criminal investigation, for example, I'm assuming like people's reasoning is articulated why they're maybe calling in for a call for service, for example, where that's where law enforcement, which in this case would be like policy committee, what they would do with that information. You know, so I'm not sure if I'm articulating it exactly how I want to, but if you go in too specific, then you're gonna miss some of the things that that could come forward and be taken care of, I guess.
Thank you. There was something that I did want to tease out a bit from the conversations, because we've talked about rank structure and those types of abuses of authority within rank structure. So relationships with subordinates and having people do things that they wouldn't necessarily be normally asked to do, harassment, relationships, those types of things. And in the past, we've looked at and discussed misuse of authority as something that's specific to leveraging the public safety aspect of the position. So where we have supervisors and subordinates in every industry, is it a misuse of your authority as a public safety professional? Or is it just misconduct? Is it misuse of your authority as a supervisor? And are those distinct when it comes to the application of the moral fitness violations? And it could be splitting a hair, but
and I believe I have seen more often than not, and again, I'll have Jennifer and Melissa fact check me, but I believe in those cases, more often than not, we put it under misconduct. So we haven't been utilizing the misuse of authority under those types of scenarios, thinking it truly could be a benefit. And I think misuse of authority, as stated, it's not used that much, and more often than not, it's more of the obvious of accessing things that you can only do because of your profession. Everybody kind of feel comfortable with that can only be achieved by leveraging their public safety position. So when we say you use one's position or authority as a public safety to cover this particular moral fitness.
Yeah. John, what's your follow-up?
So I agree with your thought. Sorry, it's been a long day. I've been up since 3:30. So my mind's kind of melted. Again, and in corrections, I see misuse of authority more along the lines of their rank structure, like I said, lieutenants, captains, sergeants, and within corrections, I could see where I misuse my authority within my housing unit to gain a benefit, maybe from my adults in custody in some way. I mean, there could be some misuse of authority by an officer towards the people who I have in custody. But again, more along the lines, for some reason, I'm more in this whole rank structure thing about staff with staff. I mean, that's more where I'm kind of locked into it, I guess. And like I said, I've been on the other side. I've been a patrol officer. And so I understand the police aspect of it. So, but to me, that's where I'm at with it, because as far as I know with corrections policy, we haven't seen a lot of misuse of authority with public. I guess that's where I'm at.
Right. Jennifer?
I would just say ditto to what John's saying When I look at cases or am bringing cases forward that are corrections, you're going to see more of that misuse of authority over AICs or in that ranking. So I would agree with that. And that is where, at the administrative level, we may see some confusion about the benefit.
Thank you. Andy?
Hey, good afternoon. For the record, Andy Hyder with State Police. I was just gonna mention that I think from my perspective, the misuse of authority is really the authority granted to you as a peace officer and then subject to decertification through DPSST, as opposed to the privilege that's granted to you by promotion or rank within your organization, which really probably is a administrative issue for your agency and what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do under your color of rank. So that's where I see it as different, that the misuse of authority, as far as for the policy or the policy committee or the board, is really about the authority given to you as your profession as a police officer in the state of Oregon.
Good point. And if, to be really clear, between now and whenever we solidify this, in those scenarios where you're talking about rank structures and you're going to see it, whether we put in misconduct or misuse authority. Make no mistake, you will see it. It will be up for the committee when you adopt it. If anybody at any time, let's say we put it in misconduct and really thinks that it also should be misuse of authority, the committee members all have that ability to do that and then be able to articulate why they feel in that particular scenario, why the committee should also consider misuse of authority if they're only seeing it as misconduct. So, because this will take us a little bit to vet all this out, but definitely we'll have it in one of those two, but try and be consistent unless and there may be something that is in the investigative report that glaringly says, especially when the other person's subordinate was definitely not willing and under duress, then maybe that misuse of authority. But appreciate all the comments.
I think it's been a helpful discussion. Would be able to build some potential language changes that you all could review and say, oh yeah, that really helps clarify or puts things forward. So were there any other final thoughts from the work group on that one?
John Frost for the record. Hey, I just had one last thought, and it was kind of build off of what Andy was saying, which the certification through DPSST, I know there are supervisory classes that are DPSST certifications. So to me, again, that's where DPSST gets involved with misuse of authority within the rank structure. Department of Corrections gives the lieutenants, the sergeants, the captains that authority, but they still have to go to DPSST to get their supervisory certifications. So that's, again, where I'm at. So thank you.
Thank you too. All right, so the next one, the big one, they're all big ones, misconduct. The current definition of misconduct. Misconduct includes conduct that violates criminal laws, conduct that threatens or harms persons, property, or the efficient operations of any agency, or discriminatory conduct. And then it's followed with a definition of what that discriminatory conduct is. So we wanted to ask the work group for your discussions and your feedback on any recommended changes. Are there things that we need to add to the scope of what is misconduct that results in decertification? A few notes here that currently the definition of misconduct does not include intentional conduct until you get down to what is discriminatory conduct. So that was done in the past to recognize that it's hard to say that there's intentional conduct that occurs that always results in a criminal disposition, because you can engage in things unintentionally, but still end up with a criminal disposition conviction. And so that was why intentional was left out of that definition of misconduct. But it may need to be broken apart into different sections. Do we need to add intentional to the threatens or harms and the property and the efficient operations of the, so those types of things that we can consider.
I mean, I personally have liked the broadness of it, because then the committee hears, you've had people arrested for things on a national park, maybe, for example, for picking up a stick or something, and they're arrested, and yes, they're charged with a federal crime, but then when the committee hears the circumstances around the whole thing, everyone's like, whoa, that could happen to probably anyone. And so I like the fact that it is broad, because I think if you narrow it too much, you're going to probably put some people in bad situations that don't necessarily need to be. And it's been pretty obvious, I think, to the boards that I've been on, when it's obvious conduct that needs action, it's pretty obvious. So that's my 2 cents on the broadness of it. I think it has to stay somewhat broad.
I would agree.
Sometimes we struggle over the word intentional, though, because I think sometimes you have to add in the word knowingly, because you can intentionally do something, pick up rocks in Yellowstone.
Right, okay.
But there's not a knowingly issue, because if you remember that one, that was a sign and what was beyond it, what was in front of it. Would that help at all, adding the word knowingly?
Well, I think we got rid of, as Jennifer said, both intentional and knowingly, because that was too hard to prove.
Okay.
So it doesn't get to intentional, so we don't see intentional until we get to discriminatory behavior. So, because there's so many circumstances where we really don't know what their intent is, you know, but, so we're looking at that. Obviously, let's say on an arrest, an officer, in theory, had probable cause to arrest somebody. How much of it was intentional versus knowingly? Again, drunk driving, right? Well, you know, did they intend to get arrested? Probably no, but did they knowingly drink and then choose to get into drive? You know, maybe so. So I like the fact that that we no longer have that litmus test. I personally haven't seen us in the committees or people who speak to me hung up really on misconduct. I think that we have been pretty good at applying this is, I think we can all agree that most conduct that rises to the level of terminating an employee, or somebody gets arrested and it's all over the media, that it can negatively impact the efficiency of an organization.
Yeah.
So we've tried not to use that as a default every single time, and only when it is glaringly so. But again, love to hear your guys' take on that. Because the one thing these two have had me hear is I can almost, all of that impacts the efficiency of an organization. And so I have to, you know, take a step back and say how many times. It's usually going to be an add-on to whatever they're doing in that misconduct. But again, want to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
So Lee, you had your hand up.
I did. I just was going to kind of agree. I like the fact that it's more broad, because it also helps apply from state to state, as we see. At least I have seen historically in some of our policy committees where we've seen violations of law in other states that may or may not be applicable here in Oregon. And so I think the broadness keeps it a little bit easier. And I just really haven't seen that much of an issue. I think the way it's been applied in definition is workable as we are currently doing it.
Another thing to be aware, I'm not sure that the committee can do anything about it, but another trend, and we're seeing both in this state and out of state, is the sealing of records. And so for our ability to obtain them, maybe all they had was an arrest, and somewhere down the line it was a dismissal, or maybe fully adjudicated, but found not guilty, and everything is sealed. And perhaps the agency didn't have enough information to do their own investigation, and were left with not much information. And so that just more of awareness that those are challenges. And again, if we don't have the facts and circumstances to bring forward, you're seeing more of an administrative closure because we can't find the information. So I just wanted to bring that awareness as well. I think you had some other additions to consider.
I did. So I think everybody is pretty much on the same page with conduct that violates criminal laws, and I don't think that we had much that we needed to look at as far as discriminatory conduct. That was pretty well lined out in the rule and the definition and coming across those things. But one thing that seems to come into question is by itself, conduct that threatens or harms persons, property, or the efficient operations of any agency. Is that a moral fitness violation, or is that an aggravating circumstance?
I think it would be very specific to the each incident. I mean, because for me, working in a prison, if I've got an officer that's not doing any of their tier checks, but writing down that they're doing them, it definitely affects the efficient operations of the facility. And at the same time, it could harm others. We had one that was doing that, and we ended up with an inmate dead in their cell. They said they did their checks. They said everybody was alive and breathing when in fact they weren't. So it definitely affects the efficient operations of the facility at that point, and needs to be addressed as such, and not just, in my opinion, not just an aggravating circumstance, if that makes sense. So I guess that for me is very dependent on the situation and whether it needs to be just an aggravating circumstance or whether it's the real reason for the case sitting in front of us.
Chief Skinner's waiting.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Chief Skinner.
Yeah, I agree that I think the efficient operation of the organization should be an aggravating circumstance in the discussion. I mean, you know, if one of my cases was coming to me on the PS or PCC, you know, you guys, I don't expect you to know how it affected my operations. You're making an assumption based on your own experiences, whether it would have affected your efficient operations. But, you know, we're all very different. We all operate very differently. We're different sizes. We have different landscapes in our community. I mean, quite honestly, when was the last time we had an internal affairs investigation that didn't affect the efficient operations of our organization by the mere fact that I have to take time, staff, energy, and effort to investigate somebody is in fact inefficient in my organization. So I could make a case that every case that I do could be tagged with that as a standard. So I really think that because it's so nuanced, I really think that kind of efficient operation discussion should be more around an aggravating circumstance rather than just a basic standard.
John?
Well, they both stole some of my ideas and thunder, because I agree. Like where I'm at Snake River, we have 500 and some officers. So, but we've had situations too where we've had tier checks not being done, and staff has been reprimanded, been sent, well, I don't think anybody's been sent to DPSST yet for it, but they've gotten letters of misconduct, or the letters of expectation is what I guess I'm looking for. And we have had one letter of reprimand from administration, but like Chief Skinner said too, is that we're all different in some scope and size. I mean, at Snake River with 500 officers, if I've got 4 officers who get in trouble, and does it affect our operations? Well, a little bit, but at Powder River, what they have 65, 4 guys would definitely impact their operations more than with us. So, yeah, I agree with Chief Skinner in that it doesn't need to be, it needs to be more of a circumstance than it does within misconduct, I think.
Melissa Lane Botchell for the record. I just wanted to add, I think from the discussion about misuse of authority, we were talking about the rank structure and how sometimes those abuses of authority are more harm to an agency or person. I guess that's how I see it as a necessary category to keep if we're considering that those lines are sometimes blurry.
And I would just add, yes, I too have seen it, especially the circumstances where it's coming to DPSSC for possible decertification is almost everybody articulates the chief or sheriff or, that not only did they do this, this, and this, and this, but it also negatively impact the organization or the effectiveness. Where I try to parse out, and if I could drill down a little bit more, and what we're trying to do is where it's a performance. So a couple times we've had discussions on, I don't see this as a moral fitness violation as much as it is a performance issue, and so it stays within the organization. If that's all we were applying to this moral fitness was in a performance, that it negatively impact the efficiency of the operation, I would say, true, that's something, I don't think that's where we want to go. But all of you have probably sat and seen a case where it appeared to be a performance, not necessarily a moral fitness. So as applied this, again, I would ask you to think about your thoughts on that regards, or any guidance or input as it relates to things that are borderline. And if it's close, I will tell you, at least under my watch, I'm going to err on the side of bringing it forward and having our subject matter experts review this and decide whether or not it is, as we continue to seek clarity. But again, performance issues as we get to them, and sometimes we see them at the highest level, chiefs and captains, and in fact, they may impact the efficiency of an operation far more than, let's say a first line person or on the boots. But again, open it up for any thoughts going towards more what we generally perceive as a performance, but yet they've resulted in either a separation agreement, voluntary resignation, or termination. Jennifer?
I was just going to say that the rule actually says any agency, and the way that I've applied it before has been, let's say an officer's arrested for DUI and he's brought to another agency, and his behaviors at that agency are so disruptive that they cause a lot of trouble. Pardon my.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yes, they've had to call backup, they've had to take personnel off a street to watch over an individual. Thank you. That's a good point.
The other would be the courts. If the conduct of the officer was concealing evidence or something of that nature, which disrupted the courts being able to perform, then I've used it in that situation. So it's any agency, it doesn't have to be the agency that's doing the investigation. So that's one way that I've applied it.
Through the conversation, I want to go back to threatens or harms. So where it could threaten a person, property, the efficient operation or the agency, or actually resulted in harm. And kind of from your conversations, I'm hearing that, well, if it's just threatening, it could have resulted in these things. It's an aggravating circumstance. But when there's actual harm, that's a moral fitness violation. That is what this misconduct, that's the reason why it was included in misconduct. That might be one way to kind of parse it out a little bit. Is that?
Well, Melissa Langbach for the record. I think in the circumstance that Carol was talking about with the lack of tier checks and people passing away from that, there's always a circumstance where, or there's still the possibility that more people could have died, and that there is still that threat of failing to do the job, leading to something without it actually causing harm.
And Mark Daniel for the record. I think that a couple things that are kind of resonating with me is that, it kind of goes back to carelessness versus recklessness, and in that causation area, right? Because one could engage in careless behavior, but then you can also engage in reckless behavior. We deal with that on the street quite frequently as it results in type of traffic related issues, but then even on the criminal side, there's a differentiation between the two. And I guess that could bounce into the harm piece. Is it careless behavior or reckless behavior, but then also going down the other couple of mental states with intentionally and knowingly, right? So intentionally and knowingly, I think, are without doubt misconduct.
It's safe to say that any case probably could threaten in the right circumstance, right? It's probably across the board. If the case ends up here and under your review, it's probably risen to the level where it could threaten efficient operations. It depends on if there's media involved. It depends on all sorts of different factors that then you're just speculating. So probably every case has the potential to threaten the efficient operations in one way or another. And if it actually has.
Yeah, and that's why I think, like I said, you could apply that. I'd like to think that we haven't just thrown that in like a kitchen sink. But again, where I've heard it and where I have applied it myself, sitting where you guys are sitting, is, and I go, why am I seeing this? Is sometimes more in the performance categories. Is this really, the agency had all the right to let somebody go, but when it comes to certification, I don't see the moral fitness violation. And I didn't know if that was just something I was seeing, although I did hear from a couple people, or what you guys thought. If you thought that under misconduct, particularly performance terminations, your thoughts on that?
I think I'm back to something that I heard you say at the beginning, maybe a suggestion is that's an aggravating situation, because I too can think of numerous cases we've had that it's been a performance issue that definitely did harm the efficient operation of the department. A lot of them was training issues. We had an experienced Eugene officer stick a restraining order under the seat and forget about it, if you remember that. Not intentional, but I forgot about it, and definitely a performance issue that I supported termination, obviously, but didn't rise to a moral fitness issue.
John?
So I guess I need clarification. Because to me, the way I read this and the way I'm hearing the discussion go is that misconduct includes conduct that violates criminal laws. So to me, right off the bat, it's something that's been done to violate a criminal law, and then conduct that threatens or harms person's property. So to me, you had to have violated a criminal law first, and then your conduct beyond that is misconduct. Or
John, they are treated as three separate things. So misconduct is conduct that violates criminal laws. And then if we reorganized it, it would be standing alone misconduct can be conduct that threatens or harms persons, property, or the efficient operation of the agencies. And then another standalone of misconduct includes discriminatory conduct.
Okay, so
we can have the criminal be the reason why we opened the case, or we can have the separation of employment be the thing, and not all separations of employment deal with criminal behavior.
okay, so I work with rocks, and they will read this, and they will see it as criminal law or violations of criminal law, comma, and then the conduct, comma, right? They won't see it as criminal law or conduct that threatens or harms, or because you have at the end you have or discriminatory so to me that's where kind of my issue with it is that you got to kiss it, and you got to make it stand so that they understand that these are actually each a separate issue: violations of criminal law, conduct that threatens, and then discriminatory conduct. Because right at the moment, the way I read it, like as it stands, is that it has to be a violation of criminal conduct or criminal law first, and then the others fall into it. Because I know I would have somebody argue with me about this. That's where it goes.
Okay.
And as a union steward, I've seen that before. So just that's where I'm at.
That's fine. That one's an easy fix. I can do that. I can separate those things.
Okay.
Please.
See, I read differently, obviously, than John might, because when I read that, based on where the commas is and the use of or, tells me that any one of these can be used at any point. They're not and or a conjunction of all of them. They are one or other, or I guess in some cases you could have multiple ones. And that's how I've always interpreted and understood it as misconduct goes.
So what about harm and the use of the word harm? What is meant by harm for the purposes of denial or revocation? How should harm be measured or applied? That has come up as kind of a question or a, how do we interpret what should be considered under the umbrella of harm as something to bring forward?
I would say negatively impacts, which I could look up the definition of harm, but I think that's what it would be.
Right.
Just like to what degree?
But, right.
So, right, yeah, I think it's so subjective, and it'll probably continue to be subjective.
Okay.
I think that's why you put together these policy committees from people from all different areas, and they look at these cases individually and apply those definitions to see, did it harm the agency or did it not? Did it rise to this level or did it not? And I think that's, and hopefully you come to a thoughtful conclusion on the case based on, I mean, I don't know that we're going to be able to identify that enough to make it apply in a broad number of cases.
Okay.
My 1 cent.
Okay. Jennifer Lavario?
I was just going to say that taking it to the administrative hearing level, these are the kinds of definitions that often get brought into question, or you'll be asked, well, how does DPSST interpret harm? And so I'm just putting that on the table, as I understand that it is a broad, it's going to be different for different disciplines potentially, and depending on the case. But if there's any way that it could be defined at all anymore, it might be helpful. I don't know if it can. It's just my thought.
Carol Deshawn for the record, but isn't that where when CPC or PPC is having those conversations, isn't that where we should be capturing why we have designated that it has harmed a person, a property, or an agency? That's part of that conversation that should be captured so that if it goes before an administrative law judge, you guys have that whole conversation captured as to why we determined that it harmed somebody, correct?
Well, I think that's really
correct, but
Proctor.
it's not considered evidence. Yeah, at that level.
But I think that what Carol's saying is like maybe, you know, as the folks who are proctoring these meetings, make sure that the committee, you know, sometimes you try to tease out more information. Sometimes we'll say that's an aggravating circumstance, and so, but nobody really says anything that was aggravating. And so you're like, well, we're going to need to list these aggravating things and make sure we document them appropriately. And so maybe in our outline of what we're trying to cover, if we're determining it was harmful to the agency or the efficient operations or whatever, how was that? And then it's memorialized for the future. But I don't know, maybe if that, is that not available later? Is that what you're saying? Is our discussion?
It's part of it will become part of the notice of intent to revoke or deny, whichever it is. But what I've found at the administrative level is that the judge won't necessarily consider it evidence. And so it plays a different role.
If I may put it out there for you guys to consider, since we're on a roll, the legal definition, not just the generic Webster, but the legal definition of harm is a loss of or damage to a person's right, property, or physical or mental well-being or injury. When I looked at the general one, it just said injury. What I like about the legal is, again, a person's right. So again, when you're talking about, you know, somebody who knowingly makes a bad arrest, so not just somebody who's, you know, new on the job and does all this, but we've had a couple cases where it was just blatantly an attitudinal check. So they weren't physically hurt, but they definitely, you know, were detained. Well, I guess technically tackled, but stuff like that. So is that helpful both to the compliance officers, but also to you in considering harm if the loss of or damage to a person's right, property, or physical or mental well-being and injury?
I like that.
And I think that covers most scenarios when we talk about what we're saying.
John Frost for the record. Hey, I agree with your thought on that. It gives more clarification rather than being kind of a broadsword.
Thank you.
No. All right. I have one more nuance that I wanted to ask about, and that's when it comes to threatens or harms persons or property. If it's your own person versus someone else's, so another person. So DUI is that easy grab, right? So I would obviously be threatening or harming myself if I engaged in driving under the influence. Is that enough to bring it forward, or does it need to be the threaten or the harm of another person and or their property? Can we eliminate the individual who's doing the act? Is it a necessary nuance that needs to be tackled, or is it just don't worry about it?
Jennifer, has there been cases where there's a situation where they didn't threaten or harm another person, they threatened or harmed only themselves? I'm trying to think of such.
Not that I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I don't know. I think I was just trying to come up with how many times, how many ways can we look at this to figure out, like, how can we make it a better definition that's easier to apply in a more standard way? But I think the feedback is it's broad for a reason, and
Yeah,
Well, in the DUI situation, isn't the public at one?
right,
Yes,
yeah.
the public.
another person.
This would be excluding.
Excluding the
harm
individual.
To self or
If
person.
we wouldn't bring it
Right.
if the only threat was to themselves, we wouldn't.
And I think it would, on the DUIs where it didn't result in an accident,
Yeah.
it was the threat, the fact that you were driving in a motor vehicle.
That you
impaired,
could have.
You put that threat out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I made that unnecessarily tangly. we'll draw it back, we'll go broad again. And broadly, we've talked about dishonesty, we've talked about misuse of authority, we've talked about misconduct. Are there any other violations that should be moral fitness violations that should result in decertification? Things that we haven't talked about, things that don't fall under these umbrellas? Or anything else you guys want to talk about, you all want to talk about when it comes to the definitions? Any other concerns about cases or what's applied or anything?
All right, I'll share one more with you guys. So the one I posed to the team that I had to vet out is we specifically, intentionally, and rightly so, under misconduct, call out discriminatory, and we define it by statute. What doesn't fit there is sexual harassment, and we've seen more cases where it is clearly sexual harassment sustained by the agency, and it's just under misconduct. Doesn't matter, does it? And I've talked to my team, you know, I just feel like I want to just call it out, right? Sexual harassment, because it was so blatant, so bad, and I don't know. Maybe Jennifer, you know, is maybe that was a statute that says you will put discriminatory where it's intentional, and I'm just wondering if anybody else has a feeling, a thought, or concern about calling out sexual harassment as clearly as we call out discriminatory, or everybody understands that they know when they see it under just misconduct, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
I think if you were to open up that door, you'd also have to open up hostile work environment, which doesn't fall under sexual harassment, but occurs quite often.
Right. Good
Are
point.
Are you proposing a fourth leg?
I'm not proposing. I'm just. It's more of it's just a conversation. A lot of times we inherited this at some point history-wise. These moral fitnesses have evolved, and so the great thing about having this work group is to talk about those things and say whether it's discriminatory. Way past George Floyd and everything like that, we said we're calling that specifically out. That is very specific and scripted. Sexual harassment has been around much longer, and maybe there was a conscious decision way back when that is just umbrella of misconduct, because we can show that it threatens or it does harm somebody. But I just didn't know if anybody else felt like, should we actually say that, and so just pose that out. But
John?
I agree with you about the sexual harassment, and it does lead into workplace. I know within Department of Corrections, it's one of our concerns, and again within my institution right at the moment, we have several of these going on, and I don't know if they feel like that it raises that the sexual harassment falls within the misconduct aspect of it. and I almost feel like you're right. We need to call it out and have it stated somewhere that sexual harassment can lead to, it's an ethics violation that can rise to this, to being sent to DPSST for review. Again, and a part of that's where my captain, lieutenant, sergeant, senior staff thing comes in from earlier, is that we have staff that is doing that to junior staff and to female staff. So I'm kind of passionate about it right at the moment, because we have it going on right where we're at right at the moment.
But even if it's being investigated by the agency, it's only going to rise to a DPSST standard if it gets to the point that they're separated from employment.
Correct. And at the moment, I have some junior staff that are being harassed or have been harassed about it. Even with the investigation going on, there was some stuff that goes beyond that, and it becomes a respectful workplace issue. And so that's why I agree with you. Sometimes sexual misconduct needs to be more called out.
And so the one guidance I've given is call it out in an aggravating. So we did misconduct, but then we put it down as an aggravating, that it was a sustained sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
Or sexual harassment by the agency, and kind of, you know, perhaps draw attention to the committee that way. And if you feel like, again, that meets the needs and stuff like that, I just like the collective opinion or thought as we move forward.
I mean, any of them that, Carol Deshawn for the record, any of them that I've seen in the past has just, like you've said, Kathy, been part of the aggravating circumstances conversation in a misconduct case. I don't know. I think you really open a door, like you were saying earlier, as far as how far do you take it at that point if you separate it out on its own?
Yeah.
Because then it could become so much more at that point.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear some other opinions on thoughts on that as we move along. Thanks.
Well, if there's not any more to talk about for definitions in this moment, of course you'll see it again as we bring forward any language changes and adjustments. So there'll still be another little conversation about it. Do you want me to go on to deferred?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely want to get to you guys on that one.
So also on our agenda, item number 5, deferred professional standards cases and DPSST jurisdiction. This is one that we wanted to bring forward a little bit more before the other items. Those will be tabled for the next meeting, unless you breeze through this one really fast. But the basic background on DPSST jurisdiction and authority is that a person doesn't fall under our statutes and rules until they're employed as a corrections officer, a parole and probation officer, a telecommunicator, a police officer. So when they're an individual public person, then nothing applies. So when they're hired by their agency, they become a public safety officer in their specific discipline, and that's when they have to meet the employment standards, the training standards, the certification standards. So they move on through their career. DPSST issues a certification. That certification creates a relationship that extends DPSST authority and jurisdiction, because there's a certification that is granted that we're responsible for. So the moral fitness standards apply to the individual who's employed before they're certified, because they're currently employed. The moral fitness standards apply to a person who leaves employment, but their certification still exists, because we've got that certification relationship. There's a third scenario when a person has been employed, engages in some type of moral fitness violation, misconduct, has not been certified, and leaves employment. Whether they resign, whether they're terminated, whether they're let go for probation, whether they're dismissed from the academy, and then their agency lets them go because they were dismissed from the academy. So there's no certification. So we basically lose jurisdiction to move forward on any case review and bring. So it stops everything. We may have the information. We may have set aside requesting the information until the person gets reemployed, but it just defers and puts everything into limbo. And then that creates kind of an adverse impact for that individual who might be going on to seek new employment in a different discipline or just a different agency. It also puts agencies in a difficult spot on, should we hire this person? You know, we've done their background investigation. We still find that we would employ this person, but if we employ them and then DPSST and the policy committees and the board say, we're not going to grant certification, well, we've invested all of this time in bringing them on board, only to find out that they can't be certified, which means they can't continue their employment in their position. So we really kind of wanted to bring that forward as an issue and have some discussions on what some potential priorities and solutions and what you all see in that as well. And I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, very well stated though. This is a topic that is relevant and very current right now. This is at the request of various board and committee members who are seeing this. I'll say more so on the board. Also the director has seen it in scenarios and really is asking this work group to think about this. If I can put it in a scenario that may help you think about this. Let's just say there was an individual in the police discipline who was let go on FTEP, but maybe there was a dishonesty allegation. So they're let go. It sits and deferred. We don't look at it because they're no longer employed and they didn't have their certification. 5 years goes by, this person maybe's grown a lot, maybe matured, whatever, gone and looked into another discipline, let's say correction, so not in law enforcement. Agency does all their background, wow, we'd really like to have you on the team, and then find out there's this outstanding professional standards that doesn't even get opened until they hire them. And when agencies maybe are limited in their hiring abilities, like we gotta have people now or we can't wait to see. So it's basically the only way this can get reviewed is if that agency hires them, and then if we can do it timely, which could take up to 6 months, through our investigation, through the committee, through the board, and everything else to say that dishonesty 5 years ago, is that going to be a lifetime revocation? Is it going to be, you know, because it could easily be 3 years, but the 3 years isn't going to start now. And so that's one where the agency is expressing frustration with this process because they would like to know if this person is going to get certified. So they'd like to see these get kind of adjudicated so that they can decide should they invest in them. Another scenario might be through the student dismissal, and rightly so, maybe they got dismissed, and somewhere down the road, usually most of these aren't immediate, right? They've got to be away a little bit, grow a little bit, mature. They want to get hired, but there still is a professional standards case, and somebody's got to take that chance. And so the topic has been, is there a path forward? Now, legally, because we talk about our authority, you know, DPS's authority is only when you have a certification. It's something to take away from. Right. And in these scenarios, they don't have their certification, but they do have, if they want to get into it. So we're either pushing potentially good people who made bad decisions out to other states if they truly are passionate, and we all know that we're hurting for people in our discipline. And is there a way forward that we have a process that, you know, we can review these timely? And maybe it's at the request of the student, maybe it's sponsorship by an agency. Now I will play a devil's advocate for you guys also. If we said that we were going to do it right then and there, I could probably presume that the outcome would not be that favorable to the individual. Meaning, if somebody on probation went through and they lied during their probationary period, and we say you lie, you die, it's a lifetime. And nobody benefited from that 2, 3, 4, 5 years of maturity, life skills, whatever that is. And we've had people come back and been successful. So my balls in the air are both is, if we're trying to solve for one, do we create a problem here? Meaning, and so is that where that's that voluntary thing where somebody says, I'd like to, or if an agency wants to sponsor somebody, so they didn't do a tangible hire, but said, I believe in you, and if you could get this cleared up, yeah, I'd consider hiring you. Those are things that I was looking at, but the problem is that there's enough concerns out there that, and frustration from agencies who have these deferred cases in limbo, and the only way to get them looked at is if somebody actually employs them, and they don't know, they got to turn around and let them go, because the committee now looks at it and says, you know, we're going to do a revocation, and it's for this period of time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
John?
I, in my recollection, I seem to me that I remember this case or something similar to this at corrections policy within the last 6 months or so. And I know we just had a kid from my institution who got terminated after going to applicant review because the institution decided that they didn't want to carry him forward because of something that had happened. And it seems like the kind of the situation you're talking about came to policy committee, and I think gave him like 5, and then he was a similar situation where they went forward with their career. I'm more along the lines that I think if somebody is in that kind of situation and maybe they could come to DPSST and say, hey, can I go in front of a committee and can I get this cleared up so I can continue my career? I would see that as a possibility, because I know that I wouldn't want to see somebody miss out on a career if they've changed their spots. And I know we had one in corrections policy where we had a procedural issue and they ended up coming back to us again on policy committee. And then the second time they came, their sheriff, and it seems like they had 20 letters, and policy committee went from having a lifetime ban on somebody to being, hey, you're good, go work. Everybody loves that you've changed and you're trying to make yourself better. So I don't know if you want to open Pandora's box like that, but.
Well, at one point we got to the applicant review committee and those were to address people who had a criminal conviction, but the agency has hired them, so they've done their due diligence, and we're just looking at it from a certification, broader scope of moral fitness. And so that was created to do a faster process. Some of them are about to start the academy by the time we see it, but they had to be hired, but they had a criminal conviction, and 99.9%, if not 100%, the agency knew about it, wanted to invest in them, but now basically DPSST and the committees have a dog in the fight to say, hey, do we want this person who did this in our profession. And, you know, I don't know what the percentages are, but most of them we support the agency, but there are some that were like, no, and not at all. So we have a check and balance. In this particular scenario, it doesn't fit into the applicant review committee, so it would have to be something similar. And again, if we think that this is a worthy thing to tease out and vet out, I think it would take some statutory or vetting to check to see if we even have standing to do it, right? Or create the standing.
Right, so yes, the short answer is we would have to pursue a legislative change that would grant us the authority to review these people who are not employed and not certified, because they're individual public persons and not a public safety officer at the time.
And if we did go that way, and I'm just gonna plant some thoughts, because I've already been thinking about, you know, like I said, what would this look like? Could it be? And again, do you say, if you're gonna do this, you've got to at least have 2 years? Because if it's fresh in everybody, you know, and their crime or their conduct, maybe they haven't even had a chance to be remorseful, grow, or do whatever. So if we say you can automatically appeal, do this, like I said, are we more apt to say no and revoke, and even longer times, than if there's a pause, some growth, some appreciation for what they just lost, and say you can within, and we say 2 years, 1 year, something like that, so it's not immediate. Those are my concerns as a former chief and when I've seen people, to John, the scenario you're talking about, that person, I believe it was 8 to 10 years, a lot of growth, a lot of maturity. When he finally, the first time didn't present himself in front of the committee, second time when they asked him to be allowed to do the mitigation, hearing him, the tens of letters of support made a big difference to the committee, as you probably all saw. So again, I think time and distance does help, but also in perpetuity, where you have to hire somebody for us to even look at to see if the committee's going to take any action. I don't know if that's a concern for some agencies.
Is this problem solved now, or so? I mean, as far as these cases are going to continue to happen this way. So right now, there's no resolve there. So I think the most important thing is to find a resolution now, so they don't continue to pile up. Yeah. And as an investigator for 16 or 17 years, it's much easier to do an investigation much closer to the time it's happening than I'm sure.
We have all that. We collect everything, so it sits there. So yeah, it doesn't get stale. Mm-hmm. It's just my only pushback I would have if somebody was asking me is, who am I going to see in front of me? Right. The person who just lost their job and I'll never do it again. I was scared. Maybe not. Or somebody 2, 3, 5 years down the road has a family, has maturity. What I'm teaching my kids, all I'm asking is, if we go down this road, or you guys think that is a good thing, would we consider a time though that before you hear them?
Yeah, but the fear, I guess, also is they just go to a different state or whatever. And then, so I think the prudent thing is to keep that from happening is to finish it at the time, send it, if you could, send it to the committee and make the committee make a decision on it. And if the committee says 3 years, then it's 3 years. But if it's a lifetime ban, it's probably pretty egregious. I mean, when we're on these policy committees and we're given lifetime bans, it would be a one-off where you're like, oh, this person's going to come back and be a police officer or a correction officer again. That's bad. It's going to always be bad.
Carol Deshawn for the record. So I get they're on probation, they're let go. So you guys we don't hear the case. I understand that because you guys don't have a standing. So if Yamhill County lets somebody go and DOC wants to hire them, once they're hired, is there a reason that deferred case can't be put into the applicant review committee for them to at least look at it and say, this needs to go to CPC versus we don't think this needs to go through CPC, because at that point they're getting the agency's getting an answer faster. Because having been on applicant review committee, there are months that we never met because there weren't any cases, versus sitting and waiting 6 to 9 months to get before CPC. So is there a reason that that couldn't be done through applicant review committee as, okay, we had this deferred case, now they're hired again. Can it be looked at that level and then decide if it is big enough to need to go to one of the other committees at that point?
As it's written now, no.
Right, but it can be explored as a path forward, yeah.
As a what, I'm sorry?
Oh, it can be explored as a path forward.
Okay.
So if we decided that that was what needed to be, if that was the course of action to review those cases once someone's employed, we can set that up through administrative rule changes and that process.
Before we go on, to finish that thought though, is, but that's when DOC hires them. So it's going to trigger at any given time. But so ours is where agencies say, I can't afford to hire him, pay him, and wait until a year from now or 6 months that that they may or may not have their certification revoked.
But that's where I'm saying when they're hired and they have something in their past, they're heard faster through the applicant review committee.
Expediting.
Right, they're heard way faster through the applicant review committee because that committee meets once a month.
Okay.
CPC and PPC meet once a quarter. And then the board has to affirm it. So it would be at least be seen way faster through applicant review committee. And applicant review committee could then say, yeah, this needs to go to another, this needs to go to police, this needs to go to corrections, or they could say this just needs to go away and this person can continue in their job.
All right.
I'm so glad this agenda item's come up because I know of particular cases that
Yeah.
are in limbo.
Right, right. I'm gonna grab Lee real quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Lee's been waiting.
Very patient.
Go ahead.
I would support a legislative change. And the reason I would look at that is for the fact of I would like to treat these all at the same way that we treat them currently. Having somebody who alleged misconduct and is seen 5, 10, 15 years later is different than what we do with current individuals who have certification. In addition, if, as was mentioned, and I agree, if it is that severe, it should be seen then, it should be a lifetime. If it's not, and we gave them 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, that gives them a period of time to grow. And obviously waiting for whenever they reapply, I think for a lot of agencies, they may not even look at them. I agree that I think that doesn't help the applicant. But at the same time, I think the only way we can really fix this is through a legislative change so we can actually see them at the time it occurs. Because that investigation, while we may have it all, there are times when we send stuff back as a committee and say, we don't have enough, and then you guys contact whoever to get more information. Doing that 10 years later, I think, is just not going to be doable for a number of reasons.
If I could just give you the scenario that this applies, and again, we're talking about people are now in that human element of invested. So in this particular case where, yes, technically the person was found to have lied, and so they're letting them go, and then again, we're talking probably 5 years down the road, they're not the person they were back then. They're in a different discipline, so they're not even trying to get into police. They're getting into another discipline. Basically the chief that fired him advocated said, I never intended it to be lifetime, but I did sustain. And so again, I'm asking you guys, if you heard it that day or tomorrow and the chief said, they lied, we can't have this in our profession, and you did a lifetime, we would never see this person 5 years from now who they are today. So again, when we think about these, it's, you know, expediting, and that's on them, versus a little bit of time maturity for their own good so that they don't get lifetime bans. Because we have seen when time and distance has been away, committees have reconsidered. And I don't know that with it being fresh, and if they can even articulate enough for us to provide that kind of leniency or compassion. So, I don't have a dog in the fight or one way or another, but I do see the frustrations, and just want to bring it to all of you so that if there is a path forward that has been asked of me to charge, then I want to be able to do that. Go ahead, Mark.
Mark Daniel for the record. So is there a way that, you know, even if it is examined after they're terminated and a lifetime decision is made, is there a possibility of that after a period of 3 to 5 years that the person could then apply to DPSST or apply to the PPC for reconsideration of that lifetime revocation?
So the answer to that is not current now.
Right.
And we will include that in some future discussion. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really warranted.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it, but I have been involved in 2 of these situations.
Okay.
And I think that would be very, very interesting looking at that possibility, because I do agree that people do grow, people do learn, people do mature, and people do change. And if they demonstrate that, I think they should be given an opportunity to have a career where they necessarily weren't before.
So you're giving very specific examples as far as dishonesty and things like that, but there have been cases of termination before certification, for instance, during FTEP due to performance issues. That I believe, although we have a heavy responsibility as a committee member to protect the public, we also need to look at the person's career. And small agencies, one I'm a volunteer with, can't afford to look at an applicant and sit 6, 8, or 8 months.
Right, agreed.
So I would love it if there's, Mount Angels is a very small one, I would love it if there is some vehicle for the person that's seeking certification to self-apply for review. Yes, there could be a bad outcome, but that's on them.
Yeah, and I think 90% of the time, and I've you know, taken people who failed FTEP in other agencies and take them on, when it just stayed at that, it was just, maybe the pace of play was too fast, or maybe it was this or that, or they needed, maybe they just needed a different coach, right? And you give that, and had some great successes. And then you turn around, so on a FTEP, what's going to get to our level? It's probably going to be that, you know, dishonesty, you know, not even gross misconduct. I mean, usually you think that's a training, and so you're going to see it. I think if they're in the FTEP program, they're going to be, well, either got arrested or they, you know, it was dishonesty. So again, because that's what got us all the way here, as opposed to probationary termination.
This is only pre-academy. This is people only. Once you're done with the academy and you're certified, then all bets are off as far as what we're talking about, correct?
If you're certified,
then it's a totally different bucket we're talking about.
These people that haven't been certified.
So we're talking about a very small, yes. I mean, I agree with.
Not as small as you think.
No, it's not. Right. No, but I'm saying compared to the number, I would agree with legislative fix for this particular.
Right.
We have student dismissals from the academy recently occurring that could apply somewhere else, but can't under that cloud.
Right. Exactly. But I do also want to preface that if it's a probationary discharge because they're not a good fit with the agency, they're not performing well in their duties, that's not a professional standards case. It's when there's the misconduct.
So we did recently have one of those probationary discharges that identified potential elements. I think it was a Dutch Brothers thing, getting $1 discount or something.
Oh, that's, yeah, the ethics, and then that was I think it was dishonesty though, as a result of that Dutch Brothers.
Oh, it was?
Yes, it was a dishonesty.
Okay.
Yes, and we're talking about the same one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, should it be a lifetime or is it, can the person grow? And there was an agency that didn't want to take a chance on that person 5 years later.
That was good.
And,
Yeah.
but they didn't, they had to let him go.
Right.
Because they couldn't wait until we.
6, 8, 9, 10 months. To see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What would be the caseload in numbers? Well, if you got on the website, how many are under review because of that situation?
Sure, you want to say, oh.
I asked the numbers in anticipation, if I understand it correctly, deferred right now is 20 according to Jennifer. Did I get it right? Deferred currently is 20?
That only references those that are open that we haven't closed. But there's many, many, many more than that are in deferred status.
So we have, like, for the decades that we've been doing this, the cases, the deferred language didn't used to be there, and so we used to administratively close them with the intention that we would reopen them.
Right.
And so it's really challenging for us to go back in time and look at which one of these administrative closures are actually deferred cases in all of our tracking spreadsheets. So instead of what we're doing now is listing them as deferred, they were listed as administrative closures. So it complicates the numbers, but anyone who, the statute has remained the same from my understanding, and that we haven't been able to look at anyone who is not certified and not employed for the entirety of the process. So
we have no standing.
Thousands.
So, to address that, the key will be making it a permissive jurisdiction. We have the jurisdiction and we may investigate and take action, but we don't have to, meaning the person or the agency can request the review, but we're not then directed as staff to process every single case that is.
I support that because that would be overwhelming. And there are certain people that determine once they're let go, it's their separation, that they don't want to be in this business any longer. So there's no reason to review them. It'd be something that they would self-request.
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts or discussion?
Thank you for getting to this point. We were hoping that we could, so that I could at least let some other people know.
We're talking about it.
That we got to this point.
And the finding is that, yes, we need to pursue the opportunity.
I'm taking, I don't hear anybody that said, no, we shouldn't look at this.
Yeah.
If we pursue it, draft up language, look at what the step would be, this group could look at it again, or we could present it, but I'm not hearing any objections on. Okay, Jennifer, is that your objection, or you had another comment?
No, I was just gonna say, if you go to the website right now and it's not, comprehensive, because we didn't have this website forever. And like Melissa was saying, we have 76 deferred cases on that website. Then you add in the 20 that we haven't closed. That would be a picture of just that. So 100 cases.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I just want to thank everyone so much for your time and your participation. And I know that some of you have stayed up a really long time to be with us and making accommodations and those types of things. So it's very much appreciated. These are such valuable discussions.
And I would just add, being new on this and being on the other side of the fence, it is extremely important to hear your thoughts. And I know that our two compliance coordinators, they really needed to hear and help get some clarity so that when things go before you, it's pretty clear why they're coming before you. So again, thank you very much.
And as far as next meeting goes, you're traveling all of April?
We're pretty much on April. We're doing a roadshow, listening tour, a lot of agencies. So
projecting for May?
Early part of May, if that works. So we'll do the doodle poll and everything, see if that works. Yeah. All right, if nothing else, then again, thank you.